Here's a realistic sword fight for you. Bang! You're dead! Welcome to Foibles and Fights, the swordiest sword show that ever sorted. I'm your host, Mike Phantom, the creator of the League of Swords. So one of the criticisms I hear a lot about sword fights in movies and TV and what have you is that they're not realistic enough, especially with the rise of a lot of people studying the sacred texts of WMA or Western martial arts or longsword or rapier or how these weapons were actually used in history. It's kind of a mixed bag. My first reaction to that is, yeah, of course not. We're telling a story. It doesn't have to be realistic. But is that enough of a justification to stray so far from how people actually used these weapons historically? The answer to that is yes and no. As we talked about a lot in previous episodes, the story is more important than the moves. So if your entire focus is on putting realistic combat in your fight at the expense of the story, you're going to make a bad fight. But does that mean realistic fights are right out the window? No. We see good stories happen organically in WMA matches and Olympic fencing and things like that all the time. So why can't you do it in a choreographed fight? But there are some things to consider. Longsword, for example, is the most popular WMA sport in the world right now. It's really fun to watch, but it can be somewhat inscrutable sometimes. Olympic fencing is even worse. You're often staring at it going, what just happened? Why did that guy get the point? You could fix that, of course, by studying the sport and educating yourself. But what you can't do is educate an entire audience on years of study in a sport with the 5 minutes you might have in a sword fight. The reason we use broad, obvious strokes in stage combat is for audience readability. If your fight is telling a story, then the audience needs to be able to parse what's going on, even as your fighters are swinging metal at each other at 1,000,000 miles an hour. Now, that doesn't mean you can't use super technique. It just means that you have to watch the technique with the mindset of somebody who doesn't even know how to hold a sword correctly. If they can understand what's going on, go nuts! Do whatever you want! The first rule of Fight Club is that there are no rules in Fight Club. But don't stomp all over the people who are just making a dance, too, because they're just as valid. Your homework for this week is to tell me your favorite number from 1 through 5. It'll make sense next week, I promise. Put it down in the comments. Until next week, remember, stick 'em with the pointy end.